Right, so arguably the focus more than anything else happening in the Middle East right now has been on the course of events that have been happening specific to Northern Gaza. A drastic increase in Israeli atrocity happening there, but that might be something we don't see for too much longer. And that sadly isn't because Israel are winding down, are being forced to back off, or are being defeated in any way there, but because they are now on a mission to eradicate not just the remaining people in that part of Gaza, told to leave or be seen as active Hamas combatants and treated as such by the IDF, but now to deliberately target the few remaining journalists in the area who are still documenting and reporting on what is actually happening there. What Israel is doing and how those trapped there are suffering. We know now that Israel want the north of Gaza cleared, all in keeping with the so-called general's plan, but they want to be able to get away with it so that the eyes of the world are blinded, so the ears of the world can no longer hear. Because according to social media posts by the IDF themselves, the last 6 remaining journalists in northern Gaza, all Al Jazeera, now have a mark on their heads because naturally they are all Hamas too now. Without any journalists being in the area, Israel can do what they like and justify it without anyone being able to challenge it. Right, so the IDF have posted onto Twitter, now called X if you're Elon Musk, but balls to him, it's always going to be Twitter, the names of 6 journalists who are the last remaining journalists, it appears, in the north of Gaza, which has been the scene of some of the most grotesque atrocities we've seen in Gaza in recent weeks, and that is saying a lot. Aid has been completely cut off, to the point even UNRWA workers who distribute aid are now starving themselves. Even the polio vaccine, which is meant to be distributed to combat the rising threat of that disease having reappeared in Gaza after more than 20 years, has been stopped from entering that area, along with the staff as well as the patients of the 3 hospitals who are still trying to operate in the north of Gaza. Every building, notably schools in recent reports, have been sacked by the IDF looking for people, and where found, they have been removed and forcibly displaced. People there are, according to a recent UN report, just sat in the north waiting to die, as the smell of death is everywhere, the streets littered with bodies as they are, estimated across Gaza as high as of now 200,000 people having been killed since October 7th, but now Israel wants to finish the job. Clear the north of Gaza of every Palestinian person they find, and they want to do it in silence. So those remaining 6 journalists, well, they're a problem. Israel doesn't want them. They are still reporting, they are still exposing what is happening there and what Israel's doing, and Israel would rather complete its extermination in peace and quiet, without the eyes of the world watching and judging them, except of course we still will. The IDF posted to social media the names of who are apparently the last 6 journalists in the area to their Twitter post, to their Twitter page, their account, along with pictures, and the post read, "Exposed! 6 Al Jazeera journalists have been exposed as Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists. The IDF has disclosed intelligence information and numerous documents found in Gaza confirming military affiliation of 6 Al Jazeera journalists in Gaza with Hamas and the Islamic Jihad terrorist organizations, including personnel tables, lists of terrorist training courses, phone directories, and salary documents for terrorists. These documents serve as proof of the integration of Hamas terrorists within the Qatari Al Jazeera media network. Most of the journalists that the IDF has exposed as operatives in Hamas's military wing spearhead the propaganda for Hamas at Al Jazeera, especially in northern Gaza." So all the journalists are now Hamas! Well, you do surprise me. And look what they claim to find. Documents and salaries and phone books and personnel tables, all just happening to be lying around in northern Gaza once again, presumably. These Hamas people, they really are very careless with their stuff, aren't they? It's this guy again, isn't it? Or at least this tired old story of, look, let's point at stuff and say it is Hamas. It is nefarious plot. It is despicable scheme. But we also know how badly the IDF have been called out on such claims in the past. Crying wolf, far too often, called out for their lies. Hamas lists that turned out to be calendars or some such, and the such like. And if they were so right and just in their claims, then why have they killed more journalists over the course of the last year in the Gaza Strip on its own than died across the whole world during the whole of World War II? More than every war and conflict combined in the whole of the 21st century so far. Anyone would think they've got something to hide that they desperately don't want reported on. Well, of course, we know exactly what they do have to hide. Everything they're doing. Every innocent civilian they are illegally displacing or killing, especially when the focal point of the worst of their attacks in the north of Gaza has been on Jabalia, which is literally a refugee camp. And now they put a mark on the heads of the last people in northern Gaza, still fearlessly risking their own lives, as they absolutely know they are, to report on what Israel is still doing there, all seemingly in line with that so-called general's plan, which included the complete clearance of the north of Gaza. The general's plan, for those who aren't aware of it, and I've only touched on it previously, is the plan for eradicating Hamas, as we're basically seeing it play out, and the basically of taking over Gaza as laid down by a former IDF general, hence the name, General's Plan, a guy called Jazeera Island, and we have absolutely seen this plan being carried out across northern Gaza. You see, in order to beat Hamas, Ireland proposed giving the 300,000 or so people still living in the north of Gaza a week to evacuate, to clear fully the northern third of the Gaza Strip of anyone left there, and anyone left there after that would be presumed to be a combatant. The area would then be designated as a military exclusion zone, and all aid into Gaza would then be blocked completely until a military surrender by Hamas was achieved. No food, no water, no medicine, no fuel, no nothing until Hamas surrender in full. Israel would then maintain control over Gaza to ensure no Hamas wannabe startup ever could again. In short, it's the most arrogant, war crime-laden, human rights abusing plan you could possibly think of. But when Israelis don't see Palestinians as human, the depth of this depravity shouldn't really surprise us any longer. This plan was dismissed publicly by Israeli politicians, but those journalists in Gaza, well, they've literally been reporting of it happening in real time. Play for play. Nobody's safe. Everyone is being displaced from the north of Gaza. If you don't move, you die, you're going to be treated as a combatant. It is the north of Gaza being cleared. Israel already control all other access routes into and out of the Gaza Strip, right down to the illegally maintaining control over the Philadelphia corridor in the south of Gaza, the border with Egypt. Not that Egypt seem overly bothered, since they've done remarkably little about it. Aid being completely blocked to the north of Gaza and limited elsewhere. It looks very much like the general's plan playing out to me. But those journalists are still there, still holding Israel accountable. They've exposed all of this, and they're going to continue to do it unless Israel stop them. And this is all territory that Israel control, and they don't want to be held accountable. They occupy it. They don't want to be held accountable for what they do there. They want to finish their extermination in private. And so these 6 journalists have to go. So where is the outcry from Western journalists against these accusations made against their fellow professionals, I hear you cry? Well, we've had this conversation before, haven't we? These guys in Gaza are real journalists. We only have hangers-on and sycophants and stenographers here in the UK on our mainstream media, don't we? Though I will single out GMB's Adil Ray for some props, as he put out a tweet saying, "The IDF have named 6 Al Jazeera journalists they claim are linked to terrorism, therefore making them targets. Al Jazeera deny this and the fabricated evidence. As a fellow broadcaster, this is frightening. Had they been BBC or ITV, we'd be demanding an independent investigation at the least." And he's absolutely right. But this is Qatari state media, not British state media we're talking about here. And there's a world of difference, frankly, in the calibre and the moral fibre of the two. Al Jazeera, as you might have expected, have issued a statement themselves on these accusations and the danger Israel has deliberately put their people in. It's quite lengthy, but what I thought the most salient part of it reads, "The network views these fabricated accusations as a blatant attempt to silence the few remaining journalists in the region, thereby obscuring the harsh realities of the war from audiences worldwide. These baseless claims follow Al Jazeera's recent expose of potential war crimes committed by Israeli forces during the ongoing war on Gaza. These journalists have been steadfastly reporting from northern Gaza, with Al Jazeera being the sole international media presence documenting the unfolding humanitarian crisis resulting from Israel's siege and bombardment of civilian populations. Al Jazeera categorically rejects the Israeli occupation forces' portrayal of our journalists as terrorists and denounces their use of fabricated evidence. The network asserts that its journalists are merely fulfilling their professional duties, documenting and reporting on the devastating impact of the war on the Strip's 2 million civilians. It's a tactic Israel are expanding in their targeting of journalists. We're now seeing it begin in Lebanon as well, as Lebanese news outlet Al Mayadeen has had their offices destroyed in Beirut. Journalists are protected under international law, but like all international law, Israel is treading all over it. It isn't like they aren't getting help to do that as well, as here in the UK, counter-terrorism police keep arresting or confiscating the equipment of pro-Palestine journalists here to try and stop their reporting of the goings-on in the Middle East. How far Keir Starmer is prepared to go again, for Israel it seems, as the UK becomes ever more of a police state, if journalism is now a crime here too. Too used to what passes for it in the mainstream, that the real deal seems dangerous, it would appear now. The latest victim of this abuse of power being electronic intifadas Asa Winstanley, but there's a growing list of them now. Get the details of what has happened to him and several others in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. I'll hopefully catch you on the next feed. Cheers, folks.